Alrighty, chat. Oh. Does that work? Okay. Alrighty, chat. Let's get started. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Dr. Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a doctor, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Yeah, so we are going to be doing a fun stream today in honor of our... in honor of it being a Friday, which is oftentimes when we allow dating and relationship kind of stuff on our Reddit, things like that. So we're going to be talking a little bit about dating and relationships today. Kruti may be joining us after about an hour to hour and a half. So today what we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about pickup artist, red pill kind of ideas, let's say. So we're going to be looking at a couple of like posts and things like that, and we're going to be sort of commenting on them from like sort of a psychiatric or psychological perspective. So I'm super excited about doing this because, I dipped my toes in the pickup artist community in the early 2000s. I had a friend who was like, hey, bro, like, so this was back when I was like a freshman in college. And, we were, as any good freshman at the University of Texas party school doing, we were trying to pick up chicks and get laid, bruh. And so, I think like in the early 2000s, there was this kind of this pickup artist community. And so he was like, hey, this is the Holy Grail. You should really check it out. And then so I sort of explored some of those ideas, and then this kind of evolved. Pickup artist turned into like Red Pill, turned into Manosphere, turned into whatever. And then, I actually learned a lot of science and psychology and psychiatry, and worked with a lot of men and worked with a lot of men who identify as alphas, red pillars, incels, the whole spectrum. And so I have a lot of thoughts on the subject. And I think some of my thoughts are opinions, and some of them I think are informed by science pretty fairly. And so today we're going to talk about that stuff. So a couple of quick disclaimers. The first is that there's a lot of variability within these communities, right? So like if you look at pickup artists, red pill kind of communities, female dating strategy, whatever, there's this idea that they're like all monolithic, right? So they're all the same way. But as we'll see today, there are a lot of different perspectives within these communities, and these are heterogeneous. So sometimes what'll even happen, what's quite common actually, is sometimes we'll talk to someone from these communities, right? So someone who self-identifies as a red pillar, as an alpha, as an incel. And then one of the most common pieces of feedback that we get on those streams is like, hey, like that person wasn't a real incel or wasn't a real red pillar. I'm a real red pillar. I'm a real incel. You should talk to me. And so I think there's a lot of heterogeneity, which we kind of need to acknowledge. And at the same time, there are certain common ideas and beliefs which kind of develop in different ways. And so we're going to be addressing some of those core ideas today. And so just keep that in mind, right? So everything that we discuss today may not be a representation of what you think real pickup artists do or whatever. And like, that's fair enough. I think there's just variability within it. So that's kind of a disclaimer. The other disclaimer is that we are going to be talking about a lot of stuff that like people find, so we're going to be like looking directly at some of this. What's the word to use? We're going to be looking directly at some of these like ideas and from the horse's mouth. And so some of that stuff like can be kind of like toxic to read. So just kind of a disclaimer about that. I think we're going to try to, keep things somewhat civil and TOS friendly and things like that, but just to let y'all know. So yeah, right. So the last thing is like, I'm going to do my best to keep this, how can I say, like organized, but we're going to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit between different posts and perspectives. We're going to share some, different, like I'm going to try to like comment somewhat on posts, but also what I'm going to try my best to do is from like a more start to finish way, explain certain concepts, which I think are really important to understand. And I think one of the biggest things about these communities is that I think there's like, I know this sounds kind of weird, but there's a lot of good in them. So I think what people have figured out, so I think you have communities of predominantly men who have struggled with certain problems. And as they come together and they try to solve their problems, they will stumble upon particular discoveries. And as they stumble upon particular discoveries, they'll share those discoveries. These will then become things like canon and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of good in them. And I think also we're actually seeing, in my opinion, the most healthy version of a lot of this stuff, like nowadays. And hopefully that'll become clear when we look at some of these posts, because like right now when I, if I interact with people who are like red pillars and stuff, like half of them are like, go to therapy, bro. Like you gotta, sort this stuff out. They're also very positive in the sense of like, take control of your life, like start moving towards financial independence, like focus on your appearance, like focus on your health, like don't, start to live a life and build a life that is like independent and worth living. There's actually a lot of like positivity in them that I think is quite healthy. The challenge is that, as we'll see, it tends to get intermixed with a lot of negativity. So we have a whole spectrum of like, on the positive end of the stuff, and then the negative, which is like very toxic. Make sense? So let's dive in. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do this in a couple of different ways. Okay. So some of these, the other thing is that like, I have something to react to real quick, actually. So I'm supposed to react to this. So we're going to do this. So let me just do this real quick. Be careful, chat. This could be loud. I'm going to go on mute.
烦恼，烦恼容易走得早，莫心慌，莫心慌，心慌容易挂墙上，莫焦急，莫焦急，焦急容易请窒息。莫生气，莫生气，生气容易遭嗝屁。莫烦恼，莫烦恼，烦恼容易走得早，莫心慌。
So that's interesting. So I'm guessing that most people are going to expect me to say, this is insane. But I think the really insane thing is that there may really be some merit to this. Okay? So let's understand. So this person is saying, pat the 8 voids, which are like here, I guess, here, maybe, your ephemeral regions. When you're feeling sad or angry or whatever. And I think the wildest thing about this is that there's actually some evidence that this is pretty effective. So I don't know that this is going to be a cure for all of your ailments, but we do actually know a couple of things. The first is that if we look at any kind of like emotional regulation technique, a grounding technique that is used when you are feeling a negative emotion is, generally speaking, very effective. So it doesn't matter. Like, you can do breathing, you can do box breathing, you can do like push-ups, you can do ice diving. So one of the interesting things that we know from like emotional regulation techniques is that if you like do something that anchors yourself in the body, that will help you get out of your own head and your own emotions. Right, so I think that there's like, this could just be a very, and what I see in this is a very physically engaging technique, right? So there's a sequence to it, right? So that you do it for a certain amount of time. It sounds like you can't just do it in 3 seconds. You have to pat the 8 voids. Then there's also like, it's quite physically grounding. So it's not like observing your breath. So if you just observe your breath, it's easy to get lost in your thoughts. But if you're patting yourself like a monk and or crazy person, who knows? It's quite grounding. Like, it seems very grounding to me. So so I think there's some validity to it there. Second thing is that I know this sounds kind of weird, but there's like some evidence for something called the emotional freedom technique now. So I first ran across this like in the early 2000s and basically thought it was a bunch of BS. But there's this hypothesis that trauma is stored within the body, and that by literally tapping on certain parts of the body that we can release stored traumas. Now, I didn't think that this had a whole lot of like physiological basis. And at the same time, there are now like some studies, and we actually have meta-analyses of tapping or EFT, which have shown that this can be an effective treatment for trauma. So that's like really interesting. So then the question kind of becomes, okay, are they effective for trauma because really emotions are stored in the body, or is it more of a common factors kind of thing, which means that it's not that this particular intervention is helpful. It's the fact that you go to this person week after week after week who is compassionate, who is caring, who kind of calms you down, decreases your cortisol level, and just that amount of like human connection can be sufficient for change. And if we look at the research on psychotherapy, what we basically figured out is that like having someone who cares about you, who can provide space for you, who can provide stability for you, and what they say, the content of what they say isn't actually that important. So whether they're doing like psychoanalysis of your dreams or they're doing thought logs and CBT, the effect size is pretty comparable. That being said, it is possible that some of the hypothesized mechanisms of EFT are valid, or something like tapping on the 8 voids is valid, right? So we just don't know that yet. So there are some studies of things like acupuncture and things like that show actually quite good outcomes that are independent of our understanding of physiology, right? So there's like some things that acupuncture can do that don't correlate with nerves and things like that. So, and then if we also look at like meditation techniques and stuff like that, like that, for a long time, meditation was effective before science understood the benefits of meditation, before science understood the science of meditation. And so there could be some underlying physiology that we're not really aware of. Back in my monk days, which I wasn't really a monk, but training to become a monk, I encountered something called Marma Shastra. So Marma Shastra is the knowledge of like pressure points in the body. And there's even like a text that I was like learning from that talked about like these, I think 8 or 9 or 12 like kill points in the body, right? So like these are areas that if you like hit someone there, the wound will be fatal. Some of those map onto physiology and some of them don't. So like when they talk about the 8 voids and they're using the femoral region. So we have 2 major arteries where if you get a cut to your femoral artery on either side, that can be lethal. So there's a lot of like stuff in some of these areas, like physiologically, and other places where we're not sure. So I don't know, my guess is that your mileage may vary if you try this kind of stuff. And at the same time, there's like some amount of scientific plausibility that this kind of stuff could help. So I think it's like, it's not as crazy as it seems, is my take. Now, speaking of things that are not as crazy as they seem, let's talk about, I made my friend with poop with reflexology pressure. That's actually pretty common. So there's like a particular set of stuff, especially on the bottom of the foot. So if you look at like the region of the foot that is right, I'm not going to show you my feet on stream lest we get banned. But there are certain regions of the foot, like if you kind of trace the outer part of your foot, that is supposedly stimulates the colon, and in some cases can cause bowel movements. So there's enough validity to reflexology to where there's actually like a ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, actually has a warning for reflexology for women who are pregnant, because there are enough cases of reflexology inducing labor, which is like wild, right? Now, the really interesting thing, if we really want to go off of the crazy stuff, so there could be a correlation between why, let me see if I can find the ACOG bulletin, because, I said there's an ACOG reflexology warning. Let's see if we can find it. Oh God, this looks like American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists Reflexology. Let me see if I can find this real quick, chat. No, I want ACOG, the actual ACOG. There was this. Damn it, I can't find it. There used to be a bulletin for this. I can't find it now. Okay. So I couldn't find the bulletin that I was looking for. But there was a safety bulletin. I mean, maybe I can do a better literature search for it. But so this is interesting. I found something else, right? So a randomized controlled study of premenstrual symptoms treated with ear, hand, and foot reflexology. So these clinical findings support the use of ear, hand, and foot reflexology for the treatment of PMS. That's kind of interesting. ANOVA for repeated measures demonstrated significantly greater decrease in premenstrual symptoms for the women given true reflexology treatment rather than the women in the placebo group. What's the placebo, though? Let's understand. Oh, received placebo reflexology. That's really interesting. Now, this is an interesting trial. Only 35 women. So oftentimes when we're looking at some of these studies on things like reflexology or CAM-oriented stuff, we have to be careful because their placebo is like wait list. So it's like we're going to do reflexology on one group, and then the other people are going to sit by their phone waiting to get reflexology. And so I think that that's not a sufficient control. But if there's placebo reflexology, whatever that means, so if we're like doing reflexology on one person where we're focusing on the theoretical reflexology points, and the other person we're still doing some form of reflexology but we're not focusing on the points, and there's a statistical difference, both of them are getting some form of touch on these parts of the body, and there's a difference. So I've seen studies like this, and that's what makes me think that there's like more to the story, right? So there are some good studies here. Now, they also used analysis of variance, which is good, but the size is pretty small, 35 people, right? It's not a very big trial. The really interesting thing is that the stuff about reflexology inducing labor could have something to do with why women have foot fetishes, or why women can, men can have foot fetishes too. But we know that feet can be an erogenous zone for some women. And the best hypothesis that I learned about that, we don't know how true this is that if you look at where the nerves from the leg in the foot enter into the spinal cord, they enter into a very similar area in the sacral region, the lumbosacral region, where some of the nerves from the genitals enter. And for some reason, we're not quite sure because we don't even know if this is really true, something about the location of the nerves from the genitals of women and feet of women is different for men, but that doesn't really make sense from an embryological stance. So from an embryological standpoint, we have tissue differentiation, and the stuff in the spinal cord should be exactly the same. So there's like this is what could be going on, but there's like plenty of counter evidence. But anyway, someone saying Dr. K spitting facts, maybe. That's right. Right? So like, I think that one of the things that I've learned when you study the science is that the science is rarely black or white. Like, it's usually like, this could be what's going on. We have some data to support this, and we have some data that, like, we have counter arguments against it as well. And that's what, like, science is. So if we look at something like, oh, should you prescribe antidepressants to pregnant women? And then there's some science that suggests that, okay, antidepressants for pregnant women can increase the risk of autism, which is true. And also, there's plenty of evidence that shows that having undertreated depression during pregnancy and after birth does more damage to the child than the SSRI would, the antidepressant would. So like oftentimes like we don't look at things in a fair way, right? So we're like, oh, antidepressants increase risk, but what's the alternative? The alternative is having a mom who's depressed. And if we have a mom who's depressed, what are the health costs of that? So like things get complicated. So, if Mrs. K is going to be pissed, I'll just give her a foot massage and we'll be good, chat. All right. So, speaking of nuanced science and the lack of understanding of nuanced science, let's talk about pickup artist and dating advice. I really want to find that ACOG bulletin. Actually, I know where I can find it. Hold on, chat. Hold on. I'm not willing to give up yet. Sorry. One second. I know where I can find it. No! Ah, damn it. Fail. Okay. GG, chat. I'm the shitty that was wrecked. Okay. So, let's talk about pickup artists, red pill, etc. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the art of the neg. Now, one of the challenges of like doing this kind of stuff is that, I don't know if you guys know this, but oftentimes the posts on Pickup Artists, Red Pill, or whatever are like some real walls of text. And that's not like a bad thing. It's just, we don't have time to read all that. So what I've taken the liberty of doing is trying to summarize, I think, the important parts of the post. But once again, like, let's just be fair. So let's keep in mind that anytime you have someone on the internet who is reviewing something, they're going to be selective in what they choose to include and what they choose to respond to, right? So like oftentimes we don't offer a complete picture. So I just want to say that from the get-go is that like I'm leaving some stuff out. Now, I don't think I'm leaving out a lot of the substantive stuff. Like most of what I tried to trim were like the examples as opposed to the key points. So I did my best to kind of pull out the key theses. So let's talk about this concept of negging, right? So summary, some people think, and this is directly copy-pasted, okay? Some people think negging is vocal rape. Maybe this will clear up that misconception. To clarify, negging is simply a form of teasing/flirting. They're also, unfortunately, why the red pill and seduction community have a reputation for being full of manipulative douchebags. Guys going around insulting women and lowering their self-esteem, hoping it'll get them to drop their panties faster than she'd drop a heavy bowling ball. This conception relies on a misunderstanding of what negging actually is. A neg isn't an insult. A neg, rather, is merely the kind of comment that someone who is interested in her wouldn't make, based on the ever so rampant women are wonderful effect. Negs don't even have to be negative. What they're really doing is negating your own interest. For example, another classic, you and I would not get along, we're too alike. You're not saying anything bad about her, merely that you're not interested in dating her. The reality is that most other women, even most other very attractive women, are constantly being made to feel inadequate about their appearance. Not only, therefore, are these women not standing on pedestals which they need to be knocked off of before you can talk to them. So they're not standing on pedestals, so therefore you don't need to knock them off. But in fact, most of the time they'll respond much more positively towards the flattery inherent in your attention. Okay? So I think like this, in a lot of ways, is really solid. So let's talk a little bit about negging. So negging is this concept that if you're interested in someone, you should, on the one hand, because there are other posts about negging that say that like you should say something negative to them. Like that's literally, I think, what negging means. So sometimes you should be insulting to the person that you're attracted to. And on the other side, this person makes the argument that negging is a way to demonstrate a lack of interest. So let's understand like both of these perspectives. So it's my firm belief that one of the most solid foundations of success in the pickup artist community is creating a sample size that is so large that eventually you find a psychologically damaged and or traumatized woman for whom some of these techniques will work. So if we look at like, because a big part of this is like you have to approach thousands of women, right? And use these techniques on thousands of women. And when you use these techniques on thousands of women, you will get better at it and it will work. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that, right? But let's understand what's the mechanism for that. So if I walk down the street and I try to break into 1,000 houses, eventually I'm going to find someone who did not lock their door, right? Like I'm just going to go down the street and try to open doors. And like eventually it'll work. And the sad truth is that there are a lot of people out there, including women, that have been traumatized. And as they are traumatized, as they struggle with things like low self-esteem, what happens is that being mean to them, being insulting to them can actually get them to trigger some kind of like sexual engagement with you, and that can work. Like, so just to give you all an example of that, right? So we know, for example, that some people have something called an anxious attachment style. We know that some people who have an anxious attachment style will utilize sexual activity as a form of creating intimacy. We know there are some people out there who will use sexual activity as a form of emotional regulation. So if you happen to find, if you keep on checking with various women and you find someone who has been abused growing up, which by the way is like not that uncommon, right? So somewhere around 30 to 37% of women will have some experience of sexual assault in their life. So the odds are kind of in your favor if you're doing this with hundreds or thousands of women, like 1 out of 3. You'll find these people and then eventually you'll win, right? Like win in the sense of you will succeed in having sexual relationship with someone. But I don't think that's because your technique is like a great technique. I think it's just exploiting a vulnerability in a population that has been traumatized and is vulnerable. So once you kind of do this, then it can work. Now, I think like that's like on the unfortunate end of things, right? So I don't think that these techniques are like really valuable. I mean, they're valuable if that's what your goal is, but I don't think it's like you figured out some great holy grail kind of thing. I think it's just it's a methodology for taking advantage of people who have been traumatized and or abused. And the reason that I think one of the reasons that a lot of these techniques are founded on doing it with a bunch of people is that if you encounter one of the 50% of women who have a secure attachment style, they'll be like, you're crazy, bro, and they'll cover their drink and they'll never talk to you again. So a big part of this kind of pickup artist and red pill success is actually hinged on the fact that we're going to use a scatter shot method, right? We're going to use a shotgun shell instead of a sniper rifle. I'm not talking about literally, I mean like metaphorically, right? And we're going to cover a lot of ground and eventually we'll find someone who this will work for. I don't think that means that the method is that good of a method, because there are far better methods, which we'll get to. But I think that's kind of why it works. So that's on the severe end of negging. So I think another reason that people really like negging is because it makes them feel better about themselves. So if you're a dude who has been hurt by women, and this is something I feel like super confident about, I would say 100% of pickup artists, red pills, and incels that I have worked with have had at least one traumatic, if not multiple traumatic experiences with women. So I think a lot of this stuff is born out of like traumatic experiences. And one of the things that starts to happen anytime you get traumatized by someone, there's a power dynamic, right? This person hurt you. And if you look at like red pill and pickup artist kind of stuff, they'll talk a lot. We'll see this today. They talk a lot about power and power dynamics, and power is everything. Power, 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 power. And so why are people so obsessed with power? Usually because they have traumatic experiences in their own life where they were made to feel weak. Right? You loved this girl, you did everything for this girl, and she ended up taking advantage of your kindness, friend zoning you, and then going and fucking a different dude. And so you feel incredibly powerless, and then you try to create this power dynamic. So one of the things that we know is if you look at the psychology of people who were abused, why are they more likely to be abusive? Right? So if you think about someone like a child who's growing up and is abused, it's wild because on the one hand, and I've met plenty of people who are like this, right? They say to themselves, if I have kids one day, I will never do this to my children because it is so harmful. That's what some people do, right? They're like, I'm going to correct the mistakes of my parents. I will never do to someone else what has been done to me. But what is also true is that some people are like, I am weak in this situation. The right way to solve this situation is to not be in this position, but to be in the other position. There is a position of power and there is a position of weakness. And we go through this thing where we like psychologically try to flip ourselves to the other side, because then we feel better about ourselves, right? There's the victim, there's the predator, and there's the prey. I hate being the prey, so I'm going to become the predator because the predator is never the prey. So we see both of those things. And I think we see this as well in this kind of red pill pickup artist community where I was hurt, therefore I'm going to put someone else down to make me feel better. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in here, which I think is like what's kind of really interesting about a lot of the red pill stuff is I think that they get a lot of this stuff right. So what I think is really valuable about this is this conception relies on a misunderstanding of what a neg is. A neg isn't an insult. A neg, rather, is merely the kind of comment that someone who was interested in her wouldn't make, okay? So I think that this is what's really, really interesting about a lot of this like pickup artist and red pill mentality is that they do things to someone else, but the primary area of action is actually internally. So they'll do all this stuff to women, but what they're really doing is trying to change something internally. So if my problem as a dude is that I get way too interested in women and then I don't say no, I don't set boundaries, I let them take advantage of me, instead of like working on that in here, what I can do is engage in certain techniques to try to change my view of them. So if my problem is that I value women too much, I can engage in a technique that changes my value towards them. So this is what's really wild, and I think there's not a whole lot of insight into in the community. A lot of these techniques are outward facing, but the actual mechanism of action is internally. So when I'm super into a person and I'm like, oh my God, they have the nicest hair and they're the kindest and the prettiest and they're the most compassionate and I love the way they smell and all this kind of shit. Those kinds of thoughts lead us down a path that turns us into a beta. So what we need to do to avoid that path is to start to devalue them. And if I devalue them, then I can behave in a more balanced way. So I think this is actually like not bad at all, right? So but I think the key thing is that you don't have to insult someone to do that, right? You don't have to put someone down to do that, which is I think what this person really like stumbled into, is that the real source of negging is not, a traumatic reenactment where you are now in a powerful position, which is what some people do in the pickup artist community. And then we're going to hunt for thousands of people and eventually find someone who's psychologically damaged enough to where this shit will work, right? Works. It's actually like recognizing that when I negate my own interest in someone, I become more balanced. And that I think is like really, really good. So when we get overly invested in things, this person kind of calls this negging, or it's about decreasing your own interest. And once your own interest gets more balanced, you will behave in a better way. I think there's a lot of validity to that. Make sense? Yeah, fear of rejection is so bad. So this is really good, right? So let's understand this. Someone saying fear of rejection is really bad. Yeah, so like, what are the ways that you can reduce your fear of rejection? Fear of rejection only hurts when you care. The more you care, the more the rejection hurts. So what people have sort of Darwinian evolutionary kind of figured out is if I can reduce my caring towards someone else, I can make the fear of rejection, I can make the rejection hurt less, which is a fantastic segue into our next post. The most important part of the game is not being emotionally invested. Now, this is a real mammoth, okay? So I can't do justice, right? So I have to clip this some, because otherwise what we can do is we can start a book club where we can read this post. So I'm going to try to reduce it down. So emotional investment. Emotional investment is occupying one's thoughts and emotions. You can't control how you feel. You can control what you do. Where your actions go, your feelings will follow. Where your feelings go, your thoughts will follow. If you do loser things, you will eventually feel like a loser, even if you consciously tell yourself you don't give a fuck. Why is emotional investment unattractive? Emotional investment is an immediate turnoff. It doesn't matter why, but I can guess some reasons. First, emotional investment is unattractive because people are attracted to lives that are more interesting, exciting, higher, and better than our own. If a woman knows she occupies your thoughts and emotions, she will assume your life sucks. Second, emotional investment is unattractive because, simply put, emotions are bad and scary. Our society acts like love is an emotion and our true selves are our emotions, but that's BS. Our value lies in what we can do when we are rational, what we've learned in our life, what we know how to do, and what we strive to achieve and be when we are clear-headed. So I'm going to pause here because I think like we got to respond to this. So I think that this is a great place to start. Emotional investment is when emotions occupy your thoughts and feelings. Now, I think this is completely correct. So I wouldn't use that term. So I would use the term attachment. In CBT, we use the phrase thought fusion to kind of describe this quality. But there is absolutely a situation where our emotions dominate our experience. So when I'm working with a patient who's suicidal, their emotion of hopelessness is so profound that it occupies the entirety of their mind. They're thinking through suicidal thoughts. Their actions are completely passive. They become doormats. They don't get out of bed. It's all kinds of stuff is going on. Their actions are shaped by it. It's like an overwhelming emotional experience. And in my experience of working with people who are pickup artists, red pillars, etc., many of them start this way, right? Because a lot of this is about moving from an incel to a red pillar, moving from an incel to an alpha, moving from a beta to an alpha. And if you look at the beta, a beta is someone who has emotions, right? But emotions are bad. We want to be rational. We don't want emotions. And so I think that being overly emotionally invested is absolutely a bad thing. I think not being able to temper your emotional investment is absolutely a bad thing. I would call it attachment. I also agree with this fundamental premise that if your emotions are running the show, they will drive your actions, they will drive your thoughts, and rationally trying to tell yourself that this is not true doesn't work. So I think that there's a lot of positivity here because they're saying, okay, irrespective of how you feel or what you think, you should focus on your actions because eventually your actions will create emotions and will create thoughts. That I agree with 100%. Okay? So let's just use this. Where your actions go, your feelings will follow, and where your feelings go, your thoughts will follow. And this is the premise that they have, right? Actions lead to emotions, emotions lead to thoughts. And if you feel like a loser and you do loser things, you will eventually feel like a loser. I completely agree. This is why, even if you're hopeless, I think you should go to therapy. All right, so here's the challenge of going to therapy. When I work with people who are reluctant to go into therapy, the most common thing that they say is like, I don't know how this will help. I can't imagine this helping. I don't understand what the value of just talking about my problems is. I have a recessed chin. I'm 5'4". I have no prospects. I'm a virgin. I don't understand how going to therapy will fix my problems because these are the problems. And ultimately what we see is it's the actions that matter, not the circumstances. When you go to therapy, things improve, right? You start to feel better. And then your thoughts will start to change as well. So if we're talking about something that's like clinically oriented, right, then therapy is the right move. But as we see a lot of times, like so Kruti works with a coach, I work with a coach for various things. And we have a coaching program that's like quite successful and works really, really well at this kind of stuff. Taking the action to engage with someone who will help you like with your emotions and help you with your thoughts and stuff like that is very, very helpful. So taking the right action is fantastic. And people who come to me for therapy, and if they keep showing up, like their emotions start to feel better and their thoughts follow after that. Okay? So that's absolutely true. Now, here's the bulk of the problem that I see with a lot of this like pickup artist and manosphere and red pill kind of thinking is that they'll start on really solid foundations. And I think there's a lot of good experiential learning, but then they extrapolate out and they kind of leave science behind, right? So there's this big idea in these communities that these are scientifically based, but they're not really. Like some of it is, but the majority of it isn't. And let's understand a little bit about why. So why is emotional investment unattractive? Emotional investment is an immediate turnoff. It doesn't matter why, but I can guess some of the reasons. So the first thing is that this is not correct. Emotional investment is not an immediate turnoff. In fact, the science suggests very clearly that what makes emotional investment unattractive is a discrepancy in emotional investment. when you're madly in love with someone and they don't know who you are, that is unattractive. But when you are madly in love with someone and they are madly in love with you, that is the most attractive, right? So I want y'all to just think about this for a second. Think about the times when you've been madly head over heels in love with you. If the other person was mad head over heels in love with you too, would you be turned off from that? Absolutely not. In fact, that's what you want. And for those of y'all that are in healthy, happy relationships, you'll sometimes find that y'all fall in love like way too quickly, but both of y'all fell in love, so it's totally fine. Emotional investment is not unattractive. A discrepancy in emotional investment is unattractive. This is what we call creepy or cringe. And think about other times in your life where like there may be someone who's deeply in love with you, but you didn't feel the same way. That's what makes it unattractive. So here's my first problem with this kind of thinking. They make statements that are absolute, that don't depend on the other person. There's no relationship, right? Like there's no like understanding of this other person as part of the equation. See, a relationship is not about you are all this way and they are all this way, and this is the truth of the matter. Human beings are not animals. I mean, we are in some way, but the whole point of a human being is that human beings may have a certain kind of nature, right? So they'll make these kinds of statements, and we'll see these women are naturally like, they're like nesters, and they do this and they do this. And the whole fucking point of being human is that it is in our nature to sit around all day, eat Twinkies, and jerk off. But the majority of the human beings don't do that, right? So the whole point of being human is that we can run against some of our impulses. The other thing to keep in mind when they make these kinds of generalizations that emotional investment is unattractive is that there is variation within the population. So if you look at like statistics about genders, ethnicities, things like that, what we find is that there is far more variation within a population than there is between populations. Now, I know that sounds kind of confusing, so let me explain. So if you look at like, let's say ethnicities. So a lot of people say like, oh, Indians make good doctors, right? Okay, fair enough. But if you look at like good doctors and bad doctors, there is a greater difference between the best Indian doctor and the worst Indian doctor than there is between the average Indian doctor and the average pick whatever ethnicity of doctor you want. So even though, for example, the majority of violent crimes are conducted by men, we know that there's a bigger gap between the most violent man and the least violent man compared to the most violent man and the most violent woman, or the least violent man and the least violent woman. This gap is smaller than the gap within a population. So when people say like, oh, women like this, no, like there's variability, right? We know there's 5-factor analysis. Your psychology, your genetics, your experiences, the traumas that you had, that creates so much individual variability that these generalizations are generally speaking not useful. And if what they said was true, you would not need psychotherapists. You could just have a set protocol where all of the psychotherapy would be the same for every single human being, or the men psychotherapy would be different from female psychotherapy, right? There's a lot of individual variation. So it's not that emotional investment is unattractive. It's that emotional investment is very attractive if it is matched by the other person. And that's like a fact. So this is also why what we see in a lot of the pickup artist community is that these people will adopt these kinds of ideas. And since they never want to get emotionally invested, very few of them will actually enter healthy long-term relationships, right? Because they're actually severing themselves from one of the most important requirements for long-term relationships. What they basically optimize for is the short-term gain of a relationship, like getting laid. And in optimizing that short term, they kind of like shoot themselves in the foot for like the long game. So it's kind of like if I'm playing a video game, I can like spend all of my money and all of my points for like to optimize my level 1 to 10 grind, but I don't save anything for like a long-term late game kind of thing. This is what I see a lot. Okay, so it's not that emotional investment is immediate turnoff. Emotional investment is an immediate turnoff if the person doesn't match what you have. First, emotional investment is unattractive because people are attracted to lives that are more interesting, exciting, higher, and better than their own. So now we get to some of the fun stuff. This is what we call projection. So another big problem in the pickup artist community is that they don't understand when you make statements like, it's unattractive because people are attracted to more exciting lives than their own. That says more about your psychology than it does about women's psychology. This is the big thing that they, I think, really make a mistake about. They should really turn the lens on themselves. So oftentimes, I'll like put it to you very simply, right? So like when we think about gift giving, what we know from human beings, there are tons of studies on this. I think gift giving is just a good example. Is that when someone gives you a gift, what is the meaning of that gift? The meaning of that gift isn't what's in the other person's head, it's what's in your head, right? So the way that you interpret a gift depends on what is in your mind when you give a gift. Why do you give a gift? What's in your mind? And then that's the way that you interpret gifts from other people. So this matters a lot in relationships. Because for some people, right, like let's just talk about women, for example, because I see this a lot. Getting a valuable gift, the more money you spend on the gift correlates with how much you value me. But that's not what's in the dude's head when they give a gift, right? So I have a certain I don't know how to say this. I have a certain interpretation of gifts and someone else can have a certain interpretation of gifts. And someone can say, okay, if you don't give me a very expensive engagement ring, that means you don't love me. But the person who's giving the gift can love you plenty and give you a less valuable engagement ring. They may have a different internal compass. So we see this a lot where they say, okay, people are attracted to people whose lives are more exciting. And I think that that's true, especially if you're working with people who don't have good lives. But I've worked with tons of women, right? Like well over 100 in terms of like a long-term like psychotherapy kind of relationship where they don't need you to have a more exciting life. They're actually fully capable of building exciting lives by themselves. I've worked with women who make hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. I've worked with women who have house husbands and mutually made that decision and are completely happy. And they're not out there having affairs. I'm pretty sure, right? Because I'm their psychiatrist and they usually tell me when they feel like having an affair and then we work through it. So this is more about what you think is attractive. So what I tend to find when I read a lot of these like pickup artists and I work with people who are red pillars and cells, whatever, is that they long for this lifestyle, right? And we see that in the manosphere influencers. So what we have is like all of these people that are like, I'm going to drive these fancy cars and I'm going to have this fancy place and I'm going to hire all these women and pay them a ton of money to come to my mansion and pretend like they're super into me. So the envy is in you. It's not in women. And all you have to do to figure out what women want is talk to them. Right? Or you can look at research. That's fair enough too. And here's the other crazy thing, is that sometimes, I know it sounds insane, women don't want the same thing. It's wild. Sometimes women are individual human beings who want different things. Some of them want stability. Some of them want excitement. Some of them want a companion. Some of them want trust. Some of them want cats. Right? Like, so this is the thing. Like, you got to be super careful about this. And I think if you live an exciting life, is that attractive to the average person? Absolutely. So we're not saying don't live an exciting life if that's what you want to live. It's just different people may be attracted to that in different ways. So be very careful about these kinds of assumptions. So I would say that the way I would modify this is emotional investment is unattractive because people are attracted to lives that are more interesting, excited, and better than our own. So I think this depends a lot on your contentment. So the more content you are, the less you care about better, higher, whatever, right? So that's like pretty simple. And I think there's plenty of scientific evidence to support that as well. When we're missing something in our lives, we long for something more. But when we have something in our lives, like we don't long for better, more interesting, more exciting. And I'll give you all just such a simple example, which maybe doesn't apply at all, but I think it really illustrates the point. I've met very few parents. Most parents are pretty content with their kids, right? They don't need their kid to be more exciting, better, smarter, like some of them do. Some of them wish their kid was more. But I would say the majority of parents that I know and have worked with are not wishing that their child was better, but that their child was living their life in their best way. They don't wish for a better child. And you could say that that's apples and oranges because we're talking about human beings and dating and relationships. Fair enough, right? So that's a nuance and argument against it. I'm sure there are others. If a woman knows she occupies your thoughts and emotions, she will assume your life sucks. So this one, I think, is like, no, just no. So there's a great book by Eric Maria Remarque, who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. And he wrote another book in which he has a great quote in which he says, anything that a man does for a woman, it doesn't matter how stupid it is. But if you do it for the sake of a woman, she will like it, right? So he's generalizing about women too. But I think in this story, what happens is there's a dude who goes outside of a woman's window, and then he sings her some kind of song in the middle of the night. And we see this in all of the rom-coms. And the dude doesn't even have to be a good singer. It's not like they're on stage with hundreds of thousands of fans cheering on their song. It's that a man is usually debasing himself for the sake of a woman. And sometimes women are super into that. How do we know they're super into that? Or how do we know they're super into that? Because, well, this is what sells rom-coms, right? This is what's in all the rom-coms. So when you do something for the sake of someone, when you really think about someone, when you really focus on someone, when you put them first in your mind, I don't think that's unattractive. I think usually it's the opposite. Now, if that's the case, right? So when someone is like, hey, I really care about you. I want you to have an amazing birthday. I baked your favorite cake. I got tickets to your favorite concert. And I'm trying to make your life awesome today. I don't think the instinctive response is, ew, oh my God, I hate that. Get out of my life. I much prefer someone who treats me like crap and devalues me at every opportunity. Now, there are people who think that way. Those are the people who are traumatized. Those are the people who, when they were growing up and their parents abused them, hit them, things like that, they said, I'm doing this because I love you. And then they get confused about what the nature of love is. And then they freak out when someone does something nice to them because their associations of something nice means that something bad is coming afterward. Or the reason that mom or dad is being so nice to me and getting me all my dolls is because they feel guilty for doing something bad to me earlier. So those people exist. Okay? Now, if this person believes this, I disagree with the general absolutism of it, but let's also understand that this person is coming from a valid place. So if I am so right about this and they're so wrong about it, they're stupid. No, they're coming from a very valid place. And this is what we have to understand. See, the people who believe this, it's true for them. The people who believe this are the ones who emotionally invested in a relationship that wasn't reciprocated. The people who believe this are actually, when they were good of heart and they cared about another human being and they put that other human being ahead of them, they unfortunately ran into one of the human beings on the planet who was more than happy to take advantage of their kindness. They did everything for this person. I'll pick you up from the airport. You can cry on my shoulder when your boyfriend is mean to you. I'm going to do everything that I can to make your life better. And somehow that means that you're not interested in a sexual relationship with me. So they've had this experience, right? There are many reasons for that. The first is that sometimes women do take advantage of men. Sometimes men take advantage of women. Sometimes human beings take advantage of each other. Sometimes human beings, very often, I think far too often, will take another human being's kindness for granted. But I don't think that means that the whole race is bad or that you should stop being kind. It just means you need to be more careful about who you get emotionally invested in. I think there's a lot of right stuff in here. Because when we get so attached to this person and our rational mind is telling us that, hey, this person is not reciprocating, but we love them so much, we have so much hope that we keep on investing in the relationship. We keep on hoping one day they'll see how beautiful I am, how much I love them, and then we'll be together the way we were always meant to be. I don't blame someone for doing that, and then someone takes advantage of them. Because think about it, right? There are a lot of people out there, probably me and you included, who would love it if someone existed solely for our benefit, who put us first, and who we didn't have to reciprocate in any way. And this fucking poor guy, he's so caught up in me that like I don't have to do shit for him. He's going to keep on doing nice stuff for me. There are human beings on the planet, and each and every one of us is probably one of those human beings where our natural inclination is to take advantage of people who don't ask for anything in return. It's sad. But I think so many pickup artists, red pillars, betas, incels, alphas, whatever, were born because they honestly offered the best of what they have to give, and someone just took it and took it for granted. Okay. Now we get on to more stuff. Second, emotional investment is unattractive because, simply put, emotions are bad and scary. Our society acts like love is an emotion and our true selves are our emotions. But that's bullshit. Our value lies in what we can do when we are rational, what we've learned in our life, and what we know how to do, and what we strive to achieve and be when we are clear-headed. So I think that, once again, there's like elements of truth to this, but I think that this is, generally speaking, I would say this is wrong. So emotions, once again, aren't unattractive. It's just inappropriate emotions, unmatched emotions, unregulated emotions are absolutely attractive. Unattractive. Emotions aren't bad and scary, right? So emotions are a part of human beings. They're not bad and scary. If they were bad and scary, none of the movies we would watch would have music. What does music add to a movie? It adds emotion. Watch a movie on mute without subtitles. You can add subtitles if you want to. Your emotional experience of the movie will be way less. So emotions aren't bad or scary. Unregulated emotion, untempered emotion, excessive emotion, under amounts of emotion, those can be bad or scary. The second thing is this idea that the only thing that we're like good for is what we can do when we're rational. That's incorrect too. So let's understand this. If we look at the science of optimal performance, the science of optimal performance does not include an absence of emotion. In fact, the opposite, right? So we know that a flow state involves a uniformity or a combining of emotion and rational thinking. If you talk to people who are exceptionally successful, all of them have some positive relationship with their emotions. So you can look at creativity. Why is music successful? Not because it's devoid of emotion, because it captures emotion, because it transmits emotion. Why are authors successful? Because they capture and transmit emotion. They're cool ideas too. Even if we look at things like sports performance, what makes a good coach? A good coach is someone who comes into the locker room at halftime when your team is getting crushed 28-3 and tells you we can win this. Gives a good speech, activates your emotions. Your best work is actually when you're emotional. When do we have the most breakthroughs in psychotherapy? Not when things are devoid of emotion, but when there's active emotion. Emotions are not bad or scary. The only thing that makes them bad or scary is we don't know how to deal with them. So if we look at what makes something bad, it is an inability to utilize it properly that makes it bad. Is fire good or bad? Well, that depends. Do you know how to use fire? Can fire be bad? Absolutely. Can it be scary? Absolutely. Doesn't mean that it is bad or scary. That depends on your capability. And this is, once again, the common theme that I see in a lot of this pickup artist kind of stuff, is that they say that this thing is bad, but they label the thing as bad as opposed to my inability to understand the thing. Right? This is like saying all fire is bad because I don't know how to use it. No, my dude. If you look at, research on emotions, if you look at outcomes of people who are very successful, there is an integration of emotion into rational thinking. And the reason it's bad or scary for you, which I don't dispute, if this person says it's bad or scary, I even think that they have a valid perspective because it's bad or scary for them because they don't know how to use them. And why do so many men think that emotions are bad or scary? Because we are actually deprived opportunities to learn how to understand and harness emotion. We are actively discouraged from emotional competence, from emotional mastery. Right? So we're taught to discourage our emotions. We are taught that emotions are bad or scary if you're a dude. I'm assuming this is written by a man, but could be written by a woman. Who knows? Right? So I think that there's like a valid reason to feel this way. But there's another thing that I think is super sad about this, is that a lot of men are also taught that our value doesn't lie in anything except for what we provide. So this is a very common experience of men. Right? And I'll see like posts about this on our subreddit where it's like people will talk about, okay, I don't understand how someone can have intrinsic value. And the reason that people find that hard to understand, and the reason that so many men feel this way, is because that's the way we're treated. We are treated as a paycheck. We are treated as a body. We are treated as a sack of meat. Right? So like, soldiers aren't the only humans that sacrifice their bodies for the sake of their work. Construction workers, roofers, plumbers, being fucking hunched over all the time. Right? So we are very, very, very commonly taught as men that our value depends on what we can provide. And what makes me sad to see this is that this may seem like a form of empowerment, right? When we sort of say like, hey, like, we're only as valuable as what, but that makes me sad. No, I think that like you don't accept the premise and then run with it to the maximum. Recognize that the premise is wrong. Recognize that if you're surrounded by people who only see you as a meal ticket, the solution is not to become the best meal ticket possible. The solution is to find different people because they absolutely exist. And I'd say they're 50% of the world. That's just my gut check. But this is such a sad conditioning that I see so much. And everyone's all really quick to judge. You can even say myself included. The manosphere. Oh, the manosphere is toxic. Toxic masculinity. How did we get this way? Who made the manosphere toxic? And people will say the patriarchy. And like, mothers helped build the patriarchy. Right? Society is not all created by men. The biggest influence in a man's life is probably their mom. I don't think it's their dad. I think it's their mom. So I think we've got to be like really, really like careful about this stuff. We've got to be nuanced about this stuff. We have to admit that even any of the statements that I made, like, are they open to criticism? Absolutely. If y'all disagree, enlighten me. But don't fall into this trap. And it's not, it's an easy trap to fall into because that's been your experience. The only people who care about you are people who are who didn't believe in your intrinsic value. And how can I stand here saying this? It's because I actually dated someone who did see my intrinsic value. So I'm one of the lucky ones who saw that, oh my goodness, a different world is possible. Right? Where people can respect me even though I haven't accomplished much. And the really cool thing is that when I met that person and they did that for me, it said I didn't want to disappoint them. I was like, they believe I'm capable of something, like I am capable of something. They see something within me, and my life is surrounded by failure. And they see something within me that is worth it. So okay, let's give that a shot. Let's try to be something. And if someone has these kinds of ideas and these kinds of beliefs, we as a society, we fucking blame them for it. But y'all have to understand that if you look at society and the way people act, it's much more about what people did to them than what they do. That's how we learn. Monkey see, monkey do. Why do we have dialects? Because our brain is designed to absorb the things around us. And the main question that we need to be asking when it comes to toxic masculinity is not what is wrong with this person, but how did they get this way? How did this person form? And this is what I'm telling y'all. I've worked with a ton of these people. Trauma is at the top of the list. Sometimes by a woman, sometimes by parents, sometimes by society. So I think it's a wrong belief that emotions are bad and scary. But I think it's completely understandable that there's a vast majority of men, or a vast population of men, who believe that. Most of our emotions are selfish, irrational, unrealistic, uncontrollable, and oftentimes downright evil. Emotions are fundamentally needy. They always want something, even if the want is to help someone. If you see a beautiful woman and think, I like her, I want to make her happy and do nice things for her, you're lying to yourself. You want things from her. So I think this, once again, is 50% true and 50% false. Or what I would say is 50% of it is 100% true, and some of the conclusions are false. So emotions are selfish, irrational. I think this is true. So emotions in some way are irrational, right? Because emotions are not the product of rationality. And at the same time, emotions can be incredibly rational. So remember that emotions are rapid analyses that are not critically done, that are but can be very, very accurate. So I'll give you all a simple example. I don't know if y'all have ever been in a situation where you feel like you're being scammed. And if you look at it rationally, if you look at the actual data that you see, there's someone smiling, being nice to you. There's no rational reason to think that this person is trying to take advantage of you. But your emotions are able to detect and process information that your analytical mind does not have access to. And that can be incredibly rational. Thence, once you explore the emotion, you will discover there's a ton of rationality to it. So I see this a lot in relationships where someone feels really guilty and angry at someone. You feel angry at someone for being sick. And then you're this is incredibly irrational. But the more that you tunnel down into it, the reason that you realize you're angry for them for being sick is because they are using their sickness to take advantage of you. They're only really 50% sick, but they're pretending to be 100% sick to make sure you do all their work for you. Their sickness is a vehicle for their laziness. In this case, your anger is completely justified. And this is the reality of what things commonly are. Your emotions are much more rational than we give them credit for. Usually the irrationality of emotions is in their incompleteness, not the fact that they're irrational. So emotions are just very rapid ways of processing subconscious information, and that information can be wrong. So it's type 1 reasoning by Daniel Kahneman, using his model. Right? So I think that they're sort of irrational, but also sort of rational. Unrealistic, uncontrollable. absolutely incorrect in both cases, right? So emotions can absolutely be controlled to some extent. I don't know what you mean by controllable. Can you flip a switch and feel angry? Like, sort of. I don't know exactly what this means, but generally speaking, I think emotions can be controlled. I think there are processes to evoke and there are processes to suppress emotions. There are processes to evoke emotions. There are processes to process emotions. So I think that we can control them quite a bit. Like, we know that. Like, so we know that our frontal lobes are capable of sending inhibitory signals to our amygdala. And that is like this most scientific, simple proof that you can have that emotions are controllable. We can control them. Now, if you're saying, can you turn on emotions off and on like a switch? I don't think it's quite like a switch. But I think if you talk to a lot of people who are creative, what you discover is they have processes to activate certain emotions, and then we have processes to deactivate other emotions. This is also true in psychiatry. We control our emotions all the fucking time. We teach all of our patients to control their emotions. Like, that's the job. Now, selfish, I think, is a really, really good, really good observation. Emotions are fundamentally needy. So the way that I would say, and I think this is a good insight, that I like her, you're lying to yourself, you want things from her. I think there's a lot of good insight in there. So let's understand something. And we did a whole, we have a whole deep dive into emotions. We're on our, our 5th or 6th lecture on the membership side, if y'all are interested. So emotions are sources of information and they're sources of motivation. And in the sense that they're sources of motivation, that's what makes them needy. I think that's a good word. So our emotions are a way for our brain and body to signal to us to move in a particular direction and fulfill a need. So shame is a motivation for us to retract from society. Anger is a motivation to protect our territory. So it does signal to us needs. I think that's fair. I think it's good. But I don't think that that's bad. I think it's like we're really like losing a lot when we start thinking negatively about emotions. And I think this is good too, that you want things from her. So I think this is a really good insight that oftentimes when we feel charitable, we are actually fulfilling our own needs. Half of human kindness is selfish. In the most severe cases of this, we see something called factitious disorder by proxy. So occasionally we'll have caregivers who, in order to feel good about myself, I feel the best about myself when I'm taking care of my sick child. And so what do I do to make myself feel good every day? Oh, I'm the best father or mother on the planet. I'm the best brother or sister on the planet. I have to drop out of college because, my brother is sick. I can't date because my brother is sick. And so what do? They make their brother sick. They inject fecal matter into the IV line in the hospital. And the problem when you inject fecal matter into the IV line in the hospital is that there's a lot of bacteria in there. And these bacteria are totally fine if they're in your GI tract. The problem is that these bacteria then travel to the heart and they start to infect the heart muscle. And this creates a very serious infection. But when that serious infection happens, sorry, professor, I can't turn in my paper. I've seen it. Real clinical case. Fucking scary. Being a psychiatrist in a general hospital is one of the scariest jobs on the planet, dude. You see some really bad stuff. Just weird things. And like, the ICU calls you and they're like, this person has like a terrible infection. They're in sepsis. We cultured the blood and we found fecal bacteria. How does fecal bacteria get into the heart muscle? It gets injected. Factitious disorder by proxy, super scary stuff. So once again, I think there's a lot of brilliance in this community because they make these observations. They begin to realize that even kindness as an emotion can be selfish. Amazing, amazing work. Amazing insight. because we think of kindness as selfless. Not always. But what I think is unhealthy about this is that just because emotions are needy doesn't mean that they're bad. And there's also this association that emotions are weakness. I don't think so. I mean, I think emotions can be weakness, and emotions can be our greatest source of strength, right? So if we look at people like revolutionaries and things like that, like a lot of their strength, a lot of the indomitability of the human spirit is emotional. Some of it's rational, but a lot of it is emotional. Women also take longer to get emotionally invested in men than men take to get emotionally invested in women. So like I think there's some scientific data to support this conclusion. I think this is actually a pretty fair statement on average, but I'd encourage y'all to remember that there's greater intra-sex variability than there is inter-sex variability. So I think if you look at like how long it takes the average woman to get emotionally invested into a man and how long it takes the average man to get emotionally invested into a woman, there may be a difference on average, but there are plenty of men who take a lot of time. Like, in fact, I would say there's statistical evidence that 20 to 25% of the population, men and women, but probably more men, take more time to get emotionally invested than a woman does. And you can say, Dr. K, hold on a second. How can you make that claim? What's that based on? It's because if you do studies of avoidant attachment, which is all about the lack of emotional investment, we know that the prevalence of avoidant attachment in the general population is somewhere around 20 to 25%. And we know that emotional avoidant attachment is more common in men than it is in women. Second statement could be false. I'm pretty sure it's correct, but there are studies that I've seen that suggest that it's actually a general prevalence and isn't that different. But I think it's true. Right? So, and then men evolved to seek whatever. Yeah, but like there's also variability. And so like, I don't know how to say this, but what do you find attractive? Like, what do you find attractive in a woman? For some people, it's like big tits and big ass, sure. But generally speaking, I know plenty of men and plenty of women who think that any breast size can be attractive, that any butt size can be attractive, that any hip size can be attractive. Some people are more attracted to a particular body shape, but I think there's a lot of intra-gender variability about what we find attractive. I mean, even though men have evolved, I know this is going to sound crazy. I know it's going to sound crazy. Even though men, as this person says, there is probably some scientific evidence of this. Men evolved to seek fertile women. You guys are going to be blown away. It turns out that about 10% of men probably also have evolved to be attracted to other men. They actually tits don't do anything for them. They're all about the D. Right? So that's true too. And I think it just goes to show you that there is internal variability within a population. Right? And people are saying, like, what's the evolutionary advantage of that? Evolved? Absolutely. So this is kind of wild, but people are like, I don't understand, man. How can you evolve to be homosexual? Because those people don't reproduce. Great question. Now, we don't have definitive answers to this, okay? But there's like this really great hypothesis called the gay uncle hypothesis. And that's not even like, that's not a meme. So if you look at human beings, they are tribal in nature. It takes a village to raise a child. And so let's assume that you've got two scenarios. One in which you have 10 men who are heterosexual, and one in which you have 9 men who are heterosexual and 1 man who is homosexual. So what this means is that the 10 men each have children of their own. What is the survival rate of those children versus the survival rate of the 9 men who have children and have 1 extra dude who does not have his own kids and is able to help raise the next generation. And that's probably why it's 10%. Because if it was 1 out of 4, that would be a survival disadvantage. If it was 1 out of 20, that would be a survival disadvantage. And this is how evolution works. So chances are that you having an extra working adult who does not have their own children to take care of is probably a net positive for the survival of the next generation. So do we have great scientific evidence of this? No. Could this be wrong? Absolutely. Is there a possibility that there's not an evolutionary advantage? Sure. Is there a possibility that homosexuality is a moral failing? Sure. It's possible. But I don't think that's what the evidence suggests. And so like these kinds of things, it's like, this is like weird scientific takes. Third, emotional investment makes you stupid and saps you of your vitality and awesomeness. So I think this is when we're talking about overly invested in a particular person who doesn't reciprocate. Totally agree. But I think being emotionally invested in stuff is oftentimes what gives you vitality and awesomeness. Right? So I'm going to ask y'all a question, chat. Are y'all having fun? Also gay women, absolutely. It doesn't matter. It's an adult. Are we having fun today? How are y'all feeling? Is this fun? Okay. So like, are we having fun because there is a lack of emotional investment? Or is our fun and our awesomeness and our engagement and our vitality, is it because we are emotionally invested? Right? So I could talk like this. Hey, today we're going to talk a little bit about blah, 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 blah. Right? So emotional investment is what makes us awesome. I don't think like, you know, I don't know how to say this, but like when you look at all these memes on the internet, like look at this guy. Let's look at this guy. Oh, no. 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 Okay, here we go. Okay, hold on. We're going to look at this dude again. And then I want to ask y'all a question. Is he awesome? Yes or no? And is he emotionally invested? Yes or no?
走得早，莫心慌，莫心慌，心慌容易挂墙上。莫焦急，莫焦急，焦急容易起窒息。莫生气，莫生气，生气容易走嗝屁。莫烦恼，莫烦恼，烦恼容易走得早。莫心慌，莫心慌，心慌。
You know, so like emotional investment isn't bad. But I agree that if you're too emotionally invested in a woman who doesn't reciprocate, then you will become a husk. Right? So like once again, like these observations are correct. The conclusions I don't agree with. So like think about it, right? Like if y'all have been a nice guy, I've been a nice guy before, right? I've had relationships where I thought we were dating and the person that I was dating didn't think we were dating. They just thought that we were friends. And you pour your whole heart and soul into this person. And does it sap you of your vitality and awesomeness? Yes. Absolutely. Right? Like, that's fair. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that when we're emotionally invested, that can, I mean, bruh, like, I had a great honeymoon. It was awesome. There was a lot of emotional investment. There was a lot of vitality. There was a lot of awesomeness. Right? So like just because it can sap you doesn't mean that it is all bad. How do I know if I'm dissociated? I'm cut off from emotions. So we have a deep dive into dissociation. I think that's like on our channel. So y'all can check that out. You can also check out the trauma guide, which is like really great, I think. People have really good feedback about it. Okay. How to make her emotionally invest in you. For a woman to emotionally invest in you, certain stuff must happen. Must like you. Must feel an emotional connection with you. must feel accepted by you, must watch you be confident and resilient, needs to spend time with you. I think that's pretty good. It's kind of weird. Like, you can't feel an emotional connection to someone who's empty unless you too are empty. So, like, this is where things get really confusing for me, but I think this is good. I think that it's useful for women to find you pleasant, friendly, good-looking, compatible. They have to have an emotional connection to you. I think that's really important for a lot of women. Must feel accepted by you. This is correct, right? And I think that if you're confident and resilient, that matters a lot, and they want to spend time with you. I think there's more stuff in the post. How to not be emotionally invested. Realize you don't need to emotionally invest. Have an interesting and awesome life that occupies the thoughts and emotions. I think this is great. Have an abundance mentality. I think that's good too. I don't know exactly what it means. I'm sure there's a toxic version of it. But I think understanding that this person doesn't have to be the beginning and end of all of your relationships. Have boundaries and be unperturbable. I think that's awesome. Focus on your own fun first. I think that's true up to a point. Right? So I think this is a really good adaptation if you let other people take advantage of you. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. And I think there's a lot of bad stuff here. All right, let's move on. So the reason girls don't sleep with you and what to change to spark intense sexual attraction instantly. Oh my God, are we going to get an invitation to follow this person's Instagram for more information? How to spark intense sexual attraction instantly. First of all, don't use the enter button so much. Did you guys know that the number one hobby that women find attractive in men, I think, is reading? I saw some data to support that recently, which is interesting. Grammar, punctuation. Oh my God, so hot. I don't even know. Like, see, I don't know what this is. Stop being so nice. Tell her to go screw herself. Tell her she reminds you of screwing grandpa who's dead. Tell her she needs to stop hitting on you or you will have to call security. P.S. Don't be a psychopath. Yeah, so I see this kind of stuff. I think a lot of this stuff is like more cathartic and therapeutic for the person who's writing it than it is like useful advice. And I think the reason that this stuff propagates is because all of these feelings of anger that we have, like, they resonate deeply, right? So like what gets upvoted is stuff that people resonate with. It's not what's correct. And I mean, like, I kind of read the post. So, and this is what's kind of interesting, right? So they don't elicit emotion from the girl. I don't know why you need that there. Like, I don't know about illicit emotion. You got to make her feel actual deep emotions, happiness, sadness, real fear of losing you, validation, real lack of validation, anger, surprise. So I think this can work really well if you're dating someone with borderline personality disorder, where you're making them feel validated one day and invalidated another day. But as a psychiatrist who's helped a lot of people break up with a lot of people, here's one thing I can tell you. One of the most damaging qualities that helps you get into a relationship and also doom your relationship to fail is being 100% awesome 50% of the time. So one of the things that helps a lot of people get into relationships is to be the perfect partner half the time. So we run into this like random reinforcement schedule kind of thing where like people can get addicted to that. But usually if these people develop confidence themselves or become secure in themselves or just get tired of it, it's a very fast way to engage someone in a relationship and a very prophetic way to doom a relationship. Give them validation and lack of validation. The more unstable a person is, the more attractive that will feel to them. And I don't mean attractive like they think it's hot. I mean the more gravitational pull you will have towards someone. So if you're in a relationship that you feel like you should leave and you can't get out of, there's a really good chance that what's going on is the person behaves perfectly 50% of the time. And the other 50% of the time can be pretty awful. And so what happens is we fall into this, we lull ourselves into hoping one day that this person will, because you can see all the good. You can see them be so perfect. And you get so attached to that. And you hold off hope, waiting that one day this person will grow and the bad 50% will disappear. Very well said. I can fix her. I can fix him. Oh, ho, ho. Engages so much of our goodness, our kindness, our compassion. And sometimes once in a blue moon, it does work. And for a lot of people, they stay in this relationship because they don't realize this is what's going on. But generally speaking, the healthier you are, the more confident you are, the more you will stop putting up with this shit. And oftentimes, if you're the person who's 100% perfect 50% of the time, the main thing that you need to focus on is you can't make up for mistakes. One of the most bizarrely toxic things that we learn to believe is that I can make up for my mistakes. You may think to yourself, but Dr. K, what do you mean? Isn't it good to make up for your mistakes? No. Because if you can make up for your mistakes, what are you allowed to do? Make mistakes. I can make it up. See, I once had a professor who said that you can use your grade on the final exam as your grade in the course. So we've got 3 major tests and then we've got a final. The final covers all the material over the whole course. Right? So if you know everything for the final exam, that means you've learned everything that the course should have. If you get an A+ on the final and you have Fs on everything else, I don't give a fuck. I'll give you an A+. It's an interesting thing. I looked at, a website aggregator that rates professors. This professor tended to give lower grades than others who taught the same course. Because when we as human beings learn that we can make up for our mistakes, there's no incentive to not make a mistake. What really gets people to change, and I say this as someone who's practiced a fair amount of addiction psychiatry, is not making up for mistakes. What propagates addictive behavior? Oh, I'm so sorry. I did it. I was drunk. I'll never drink again. I'm going to go and let's go to Cabo. Let's do this. I'm going to make it up to you. I promise I'll make it up to you. You make it up to them and then all is well. And hey, if you can make it up to them, you can fuck them over again. Really weird. Really weird. Now, if you do something wrong, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't try to compensate in some way. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't make it right. But be very careful because there's a very insidious belief that if I can fix it tomorrow, I can screw it up today. It's basically like procrastination applied to relationships. Right? Oh, I have to make it up to them. And I think you should, but be very careful because if you start to believe that that works, you'll continue your bad behavior. The right way to think about it is, I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but you can't make up anything. Once time is gone, it's gone. You can't truly undo anything you've done to another person. You can try to compensate, but you can't really reverse it. Any words that leave my mouth have left my mouth and they have the impact. 2 things you can't take back in life: the time that has passed and the words that come out of your mouth. Can't. And now something cool happens. Once you believe that you can't really make up for your past mistakes, then you start to live in a much more vital and important way. Now, this doesn't mean, so some people will listen to this and they'll say, does that mean I'm doomed by my past mistakes? No. So I say this as someone who graduated from college with a 2.5 GPA. That's rounding up. It was technically 2.46. Ended up getting to medical school. I did fine. So you can recover, but you can't make it up. No amount of A's in classes will ever remove an F, and that's how life is. So it doesn't mean that just because you failed for a few years doesn't mean you have to continue to fail. You can alter your trajectory. And the best way to alter your trajectory is to recognize that you can never undo the past. So if you have to be very subtle and careful about this, because if you have a negative cast to your mind, you'll say that, I'll say, giving up, you can't ever fix your mistakes, therefore stop trying. No, it's the opposite. Since you can never correct your mistake, or since you can never make up or undo your mistakes, that's why it's important that you start to live every single day in the best way that you can, because you never get a chance to go back and undo that. Right? So like yesterday, I lost 100 MMR when I was playing Dota. I can't undo that loss of 100 MMR. I can gain 100 MMR today. But what that means is that I'm at 0 MMR and I gained 100 MMR today. If I had not lost that 100 MMR yesterday, then I would be up 100 MMR. That effect from the past always lingers into the present. Does that kind of make sense? I know it's kind of bizarre to think about. One of the scariest things. Okay. 10 harsh truths you need to know about relationships. Okay, we're not going to use this word. She already has one genital organ, doesn't want another. So like this, I think, is like, you know, like this is the overgeneralization, right? So like, here's the thing. 10 harsh truths you need to know about relationships. On a primal level, women are generally attracted to big, strong, and manly men. Get your shit handled and don't act like a whiny bitch ever. So I think this is like my challenge with a lot of these kinds of attitudes is I don't doubt that this person believes this for a good reason because this is their experience. The problem is that you can convey your emotions without being a big manly man. So if you look at the majority of people who are having kids today, they're not manly men. They're not these swole, buff, Instagram influencer manly men. The majority of people who are having children today are average dudes. They're average. One of the biggest challenges that I have with this community is that they don't differentiate between their personal incapability at something and saying that that thing is good or bad. If you don't know how to convey your emotions, if you don't know how to articulate your feelings, if you don't know how to be emotionally connected, then and all you can do is be a big manly man, then you will select for the women who are only attracted to big manly men. And this is all couched with, approach 1,000 women. That doesn't mean that your formula works. That just means that the other 990 that don't like it, they want something else. Right? So you got to be careful with this stuff, y'all. Women have a dual mating strategy. So like this once, like same thing, right? So this is why women cheat. So this is like assuming that all women cheat for the same reasons. Now, is it common? Or I don't know if common is the right word. I'm not saying it's over 50%. Are there cases of people who, have a steady provider and will have a one-night stand with an alpha? Sure. Like that's possible. I think like this is all like a strategy that can succeed depending on what you're good at and what someone else is good at. So I think it's like I've worked with women who have affairs. And the number one reason that I've heard in my office, and this could be a selection bias too, right? So we got to remember that I could have a selection bias, is not that this person, oh, like my husband, I had sex with this other person because they were more of a Chad. It's usually a feeling of emotional disconnection and neglect. That's the number one reason. Now, the interesting thing, since we're talking about projection, the majority of men who cheat